The dust had turned to mud beneath Sarah Lancaster's knees as she collapsed beside the old stone well at the edge of Sioux Falls, Dakota Territory. Her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear from somewhere deep inside her chest where hope used to live. It was June of 1878, and the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small settlement that had grown up around the falls of the Big Sioux River. Sarah's dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in tangled waves around her face as tears streaked through the dust on her cheeks. Her calico dress, once a cheerful blue pattern, was stained with travel dirt and something darker near the hem. She had been riding for 3 days straight, and when she finally reached what she thought might be sanctuary, she found herself unable to go any further. The well stood at the edge of town like a silent sentinel, and it was here that her strength finally gave out. She barely heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Her hands covered her face as she wept, shoulders shaking, lost in a grief so profound it seemed to swallow everything else. She did not want to be seen like this, broken and desperate, but she could not seem to stop the tears. "Madam," the voice was deep and gentle, touched with concern. "Madam, are you hurt?" Sarah tried to compose herself but failed, managing only to shake her head. Through her fingers, she could see dusty boots and the hem of leather chaps. The stranger dismounted, his spurs jingling softly as his feet hit the ground. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, his voice closer now as he knelt beside her, "but you look like you could use some help." Sarah finally lowered her hands and looked up into the face of a man who appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes the color of honey. He had removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that needed a trim. There was genuine concern in his expression, without a trace of the judgment or suspicion she had feared. "I'm fine," she managed to say, though her voice cracked on the words. "I'm sorry, I'll move along. You don't look fine, if you'll pardon me saying so." He reached for the rope on the well and began to lower the bucket. "When's the last time you had water? Something to drink?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. Her throat was raw from crying and thirst. "This morning, maybe." The cowboy drew the bucket up with steady pulls, his muscles working beneath his worn shirt. When it reached the top, he carefully poured water into a tin cup that hung on a nail beside the well. He held it out to her, and when she hesitated, he smiled. "Let me quench your thirst for happiness," he said softly, and there was something in his tone that made it more than just an offer of water. It was a promise, or perhaps a hope. "At least we can start there." Sarah took the cup with trembling hands. The water was cool and clean, tasting faintly of minerals and earth. She drank deeply, feeling it soothe her parched throat. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and finally met his eyes properly. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Wesley Turner," he said, settling down to sit on the edge of the well platform. "I work at the Double T Ranch about 5 miles west of here. And before you worry, I'm not the type to take advantage of a lady in distress. I was raised better than that." Something in his straightforward manner made Sarah believe him. "Sarah Lancaster," she replied. "I'm from Kansas, or I was." Wesley did not press her for more information, though she could see the questions in his eyes. Instead, he said, "Are you hungry?" "The boarding house serves a decent supper, and Mrs. Patterson, who runs it, doesn't ask too many questions." Sarah's stomach clenched at the mention of food, reminding her that she had barely eaten in days, but she shook her head. "I don't have much money." "I didn't ask if you had money," Wesley said gently. "I asked if you were hungry." The kindness in his voice nearly brought fresh tears to her eyes. Sarah nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. Wesley stood and offered his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady. When she swayed slightly on her feet, he quickly steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now," he said. "When's the last time you slept in a real bed? 4 days ago." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, remembering the inn where she had spent her last few coins before fleeing into the night. "Maybe 5. Everything's running together." Wesley frowned but said nothing as he led her toward his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with a patient eye. "I'll walk," he said. "You ride. It's not far to the boarding house." "I have a horse," Sarah said, looking around in confusion. "I had a horse." She was tied to the post office hitching rail. "The sorrel mare with the white blaze?" Wesley asked. When Sarah nodded, he said, "I'll fetch her after we get you settled. She'll be fine for a few minutes more." He helped Sarah into his saddle, and she was too exhausted to protest. The leather creaked beneath her as she settled, and Wesley took the reins to lead the horse down the dusty main street of Sioux Falls. The town was small but growing, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the wide street. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and the boarding house that Wesley had mentioned. A few people stared as they passed, but Wesley met their gazes steadily, and most folks went back to their business. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white, with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Wesley helped Sarah down from the horse and guided her up the steps. The door opened before they reached it, and a woman in her 50s appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. She had sharp eyes but a kind face, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Wesley Turner," she said. "Who's this you've brought me?" "This is Miss Sarah Lancaster, Mrs. Patterson. She's had a rough journey and could use a hot meal and a place to rest. I'm paying." Mrs. Patterson looked Sarah over with the experienced eye of someone who had seen her share of trouble and heartbreak. Whatever she saw in Sarah's face must have satisfied her because she nodded briskly. "Come in, child," she said, her voice gentling. "You look about ready to fall over." "Wesley, you can tie that horse around back. I'll see to the young lady." Wesley squeezed Sarah's hand briefly before releasing it. "I'll be back in a bit," he promised. "Going to get your horse settled at the livery." Sarah wanted to thank him again, to somehow express what his kindness meant to her, but he was already heading down the steps. Mrs. Patterson guided her inside with a firm hand on her elbow, leading her through a tidy parlor and into a dining room where a long table was set for supper. "Sit, Mrs. Patterson commanded, pulling out a chair. "I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread. You can tell me as much or as little as you want while you eat." Sarah sank into the chair gratefully. The boarding house smelled of cooking food and beeswax polish, homey and safe. When Mrs. Patterson set a bowl of beef stew in front of her, steam rising from the rich brown broth, Sarah had to blink back tears again. "There now," Mrs. Patterson said more gently, sitting down across from her with a cup of coffee. "Eat first. Everything else can wait." Sarah ate slowly at first, her stomach unused to food after days of near fasting. But the stew was delicious, thick with vegetables and tender meat, and she found herself eating more eagerly. Mrs. Patterson said nothing, just sipped her coffee and watched with approval. Wesley returned as Sarah was finishing her second bowl. He had cleaned up a bit, washed his face and hands at the pump, and removed his spurs. He sat down at the table with the ease of someone who was a regular visitor. "Your mare's at the livery," he told Sarah. "Tom Miller will take good care of her. I asked him to give her extra oats." "I'll pay you back," Sarah said immediately. "All of it. I just need a little time to figure things out." "We'll worry about that later," Wesley said. "Mrs. Patterson, do you have a room available?" "I do," the older woman said. "The one at the end of the hall upstairs. It's quiet and gets good morning light. I'll take it for her. 2 weeks to start." "Wesley, I can't let you do that," Sarah protested, though even as she spoke she felt relief washing over her. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to rest and think and figure out what to do next. Already done, Wesley said with a finality that suggested arguing would be pointless. You need rest, Miss Lancaster. Everything else will still be there when you wake up. Mrs. Patterson stood and gestured for Sarah to follow. Come on, dear. Let's get you upstairs and into a proper bed. Wesley, you can come by tomorrow to check on her. Sarah followed Mrs. Patterson up the narrow staircase to a small but clean room at the end of the hall. There was a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser with a wash basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the street. It was simple and perfect. There's water in the pitcher, Mrs. Patterson said. Chamber pot under the bed if you need it. Breakfast is at 7, but if you sleep through, I'll save you something. Thank you, Sarah said. And please thank Wesley for me. I don't understand why he's being so kind to a stranger. Mrs. Patterson smiled. That's just his way. His parents raised him and his brother to look out for folks who need help. Now get some sleep, child. You're safe here. After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah locked the door and stood in the middle of the room, hardly daring to believe she had found even temporary sanctuary. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then sat on the edge of the bed to remove her boots. Her feet were blistered and sore, her stockings worn thin. She undressed down to her chemise and crawled under the quilt, and within moments, she was asleep. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory returned along with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from downstairs. She sat up slowly, her body aching but rested in a way it had not been for days. There was a soft knock at the door. Miss Lancaster, Mrs. Patterson's voice called. I've brought you some hot water for washing, and there's breakfast when you're ready. Sarah wrapped the quilt around herself and opened the door. Mrs. Patterson stood there with a pitcher of steaming water and a towel draped over her arm. How are you feeling? She asked, setting the pitcher on the dresser. Better, Sarah admitted. What time is it? Nearly 9. You slept straight through, which is what you needed. Mrs. Patterson paused, then said carefully, I took the liberty of looking at your dress. It's stained pretty badly. I've got something that might fit you if you'd like to borrow it while I see what I can do with yours. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's very kind of you. I'll leave it outside your door. Come down when you're ready. No rush. After Mrs. Patterson left, Sarah washed thoroughly, scrubbing away days of dust and fear. The borrowed dress was a simple brown cotton that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. Sarah pinned her hair up as best she could and headed downstairs. The dining room was empty except for one person. Wesley sat at the table with a cup of coffee, his hat on the chair beside him. He stood when she entered. Miss Lancaster, he said, I hope you don't mind. I wanted to check on you, make sure you were all right. I'm much better, thank you. Sarah sat down as Mrs. Patterson appeared with a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast. You've been incredibly kind, Mr. Turner. I don't know how to repay you. Wesley, please. And there's nothing to repay. He sat back down and wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. Though I won't lie and say I'm not curious about what brought you to Sioux Falls in such a state. Sarah took a bite of toast, buying herself time. She had known questions would come eventually, but that did not make them easier to answer. Wesley waited patiently, not pressing. Finally, she said, I was running away from Kansas, from a man who thought he owned me. Wesley's expression darkened. Your husband? No, thank God, no. Sarah set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. My father sold our farm to pay his gambling debts. The man who bought it, Marcus Crandall, decided that I came with the property. He told my father that if I married him, he'd let my family stay on as tenant farmers. If I refused, he'd throw them all out. "So you refused and ran," Wesley said quietly. "I tried to go along with it at first, for my mother and younger sisters. But when Marcus came to call, he made it very clear what kind of marriage he had in mind." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "He grabbed me, tried to kiss me, said he was going to make me his whether I liked it or not. I fought him off and locked myself in my room. That night I climbed out the window and rode east. I've been traveling ever since, trying to get as far from Kansas as possible." Wesley's jaw was tight. "Your family." "My mother helped me pack. She gave me what money she could spare and told me to run. She said she'd deal with Marcus, that she'd find another way." Sarah's voice broke. "But I don't know what happened to them. I don't know if they're all right." "How old are your sisters?" 12 and 14. "Too young to be in the path of a man like Marcus Crandall." Wesley nodded slowly. "And you've been traveling alone for days with minimal food and water." "I had supplies at first, but I had to avoid the main roads. I was afraid Marcus might send someone after me." Sarah looked down at her plate. "I know I must seem foolish, running off like that, but I could not marry him." "I could not." "You're not foolish," Wesley said firmly. "You're brave. Leaving everything you know to escape a bad situation takes courage." "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified and lost." "What's your plan now?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I don't have one. I thought if I could just get far enough away I could find work somewhere. But I don't have skills beyond farming and keeping house. I can read and write, but that doesn't count for much." Wesley was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "The Double T Ranch where I work, the owner is a widow named Mrs. Thornton. She lost her husband 2 years back, and she's been struggling to keep the place running with just me, my brother William, and a couple of seasonal hands. She's been talking about needing someone to help with the house and the accounts. She's not getting any younger and the work's wearing on her. You think she might hire me? I think it's worth asking. The pay wouldn't be much, but you'd have room and board, and it's far enough from town that if anyone came looking for you, we'd see them coming." Wesley met her eyes. "If you want, I can take you out there this afternoon. Let you meet her, see if you'd suit each other." Hope flickered in Sarah's chest, fragile but real. "I'd be grateful for the chance." "Then finish your breakfast," Wesley said with a small smile. "Mrs. Thornton can be particular about people showing up looking half-starved." Sarah managed to eat most of what was on her plate, her stomach settling as her anxiety eased slightly. When she finished, Wesley stood and offered his arm. "Let me show you around Sioux Falls properly," he said. "It's not much of a town yet, but it's growing. And if you're going to be staying in the area, you should know your way around." They walked down the main street together, Wesley pointing out the various establishments. The general store was run by a couple named Hanson, who Wesley said were fair in their prices. The blacksmith was a freed slave named Joseph, who had moved west after the war and was considered the best metalworker in the territory. The saloon was best avoided after dark, Wesley advised, but the owner kept order well enough during the day. "The church is over that way," Wesley said, pointing to a white building with a modest steeple. "Reverend Matthews and his wife run it. They're good people. There's also a school, though it's small, maybe a dozen children on a good day." "It seems like a nice town," Sarah said. "Peaceful." "It has its moments. We're far enough from the main cattle routes that we don't get much trouble, but close enough to the railroad that we can get supplies regularly." Wesley paused. "The Dakota Territory can be harsh, especially come winter, but the people here look out for each other. You'll find that if you stay." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, Sarah absorbing the details of the town that might become her new home. She found herself stealing glances at Wesley, studying his profile. He was handsome in a rough, practical way with strong features and an honest expression. But more than that, he had a calmness about him that she found deeply reassuring. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Of course." "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." "I could be lying about everything." Wesley stopped walking and turned to face her. "I suppose you could be," he said, "but I don't think you are. And even if you were, what harm does it do me to offer help to someone who needs it? My mother used to say that kindness costs nothing but means everything. I've tried to live by that. Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Wesley's expression grew sad. "She passed 5 years ago. Fever took her quick. My father followed a year later. I think he died of a broken heart as much as anything else. I'm sorry." "Thank you. William and I have each other at least. And Mrs. Thornton has been good to us, giving us work when we needed it most." He smiled slightly. "But that's enough sad talk for one day. Come on, I want you to meet someone." He led her to the general store, where a woman about Sarah's age was arranging bolts of fabric on a shelf. She had bright red hair and freckles across her nose, and she smiled broadly when she saw Wesley. "Wesley Turner, as I live and breathe," she said. "Don't tell me you've actually come to town 2 days in a row. Are you feeling all right?" "Very funny, Charlotte," Wesley said, but he was grinning. "I wanted to introduce you to Sarah Lancaster. She's new to Sioux Falls. Sarah, this is Charlotte Hanson. Her parents own the store." Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron and extended one to Sarah. "Pleased to meet you. Any friend of Wesley's is welcome here." "Thank you," Sarah said, shaking her hand. Charlotte had a firm grip and a direct gaze that Sarah liked immediately. "How long are you planning to stay?" Charlotte asked. "I'm not sure yet. Wesley is taking me to meet Mrs. Thornton about possible work." Charlotte's eyes lit up. "Oh, that would be wonderful. We could use more young women in this town. It's mostly cowboys and miners, and while they're fine enough fellows, they're not great conversationalists." She shot Wesley a teasing look. "I'll have you know I'm an excellent conversationalist," Wesley protested. "You talk about horses and cattle," Charlotte said. "That's not conversation, that's work." Sarah found herself laughing, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? Charlotte grinned at her. "There, that's better. You have a nice smile. You should use it more often." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "I'd better get back to work before my mother comes looking for me, but Sarah, please come visit when you can. I'd love to hear where you're from and what brings you to Dakota Territory." "I will," Sarah promised. As they left the store, Wesley said, "Charlotte's a good sort. Bit nosy, but she means well. If you need a friend, she'd be a good one to have." They returned to the boarding house where Sarah's mare had been brought around from the livery. The horse nickered softly when she saw Sarah, and Sarah felt a pang of guilt for having abandoned her the day before, even briefly. "I'm sorry, girl," she murmured, stroking the mare's nose. "I wasn't myself." "She's a good-looking horse," Wesley observed. "What do you call her, Juniper?" "She was my mother's horse originally." Sarah's throat tightened. "Mama insisted I take her." Wesley helped Sarah into the saddle, then mounted his own horse. They rode out of town heading west, following a well-worn trail that cut through prairie grass and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. The land was beautiful in a stark way, all open sky and rolling plains, so different from the farmland Sarah had known in Kansas. "The ranch is about an hour's ride," Wesley said. "Mrs. Thornton has about 500 head of cattle and 50 horses. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's profitable enough. She's been talking about expanding, but she needs more help to do it." "What's she like?" Sarah asked. "Direct, fair." "She doesn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty, but if you work hard and treat her with respect, she'll do right by you." Wesley glanced at Sarah. "She's also got a good eye for people. She'll see straight through to who you really are, so don't try to be anything you're not." Sarah nodded, feeling nervous butterflies in her stomach. They rode in companionable silence, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of Juniper's gait. The sun was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze kept the worst of the heat at bay. Eventually, buildings appeared on the horizon. The Double T Ranch sprawled across a shallow valley, with a main house, a large barn, a stable, and several smaller outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and Sarah could see horses in a corral near the barn. A woman stood on the porch of the main house, shading her eyes to watch their approach. She was tall and spare, probably in her late 50s, with gray hair pinned back severely, and a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun and wind. She wore practical clothing, a split riding skirt and a man's work shirt, and she held herself with unmistakable authority. Wesley dismounted and helped Sarah down. "Mrs. Thornton," he called. "This is Sarah Lancaster, the woman I mentioned, Mrs." Thornton came down the porch steps with a measured stride. Her eyes, sharp and blue, took in every detail of Sarah's appearance. "Miss Lancaster," she said, her voice low and rough. "Wesley tells me you're looking for work." "Yes, madam," Sarah said, meeting her gaze steadily. "He said you might need help with the house and accounts." "Might and need are different things. What makes you think you're qualified?" "I can read, write, and do figures. I've kept house for my family since I was 14, when my mother took sick for a spell and never quite got her strength back. I can cook, clean, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Why'd you leave Kansas?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was running from a forced marriage. A man bought my father's farm and decided I came with it. I disagreed." Mrs. Thornton's expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You got family coming after you?" "I don't think so. My mother helped me leave." "The man, Marcus Crandall, he might look for me, but he doesn't know where I went." "And if he finds you, then I'll deal with it," Sarah said firmly. "But I won't go back. I'd rather die." Mrs. Thornton studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I can respect that. I was in a similar situation once, long time ago. That's how I ended up out here." She gestured to the house. "Come inside. Let's see if you can manage my accounts. They're a mess." Sarah followed Mrs. Thornton into the house with Wesley trailing behind. The interior was clean but cluttered, with papers piled on every surface and dishes stacked in the kitchen. Mrs. Thornton led them to a dining room table covered with ledgers and receipts. "I haven't balanced the books in 3 months," she said bluntly. "My eyes aren't what they used to be, and frankly, I hate the work. If you can make sense of this mess, the job's yours." Sarah sat down and opened the top ledger. The entries were in a spidery hand, recording purchases, sales, expenses for feed and supplies. She could see immediately where things had gone wrong, numbers added incorrectly and expenses not properly categorized. She pulled a blank sheet of paper toward her and began working. "Wesley and Mrs." Thornton left her to it, moving into the kitchen where Sarah could hear the low murmur of their voices. She focused on the numbers, losing herself in the familiar work. Mathematics had always made sense to her, the clean logic of it soothing. An hour later, she emerged from the dining room with several sheets of calculations. Mrs. Thornton and Wesley were drinking coffee at the kitchen table, and they both looked up when she appeared. "You made $347 more than you thought you did last quarter," Sarah said. "But you also spent about $200 you didn't account for. The feed supplier has been overcharging you by about 10%, and I think the man who buys your cattle has been shorting you on weight." Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose. "Show me." Sarah spread out her calculations on the table, walking through each point. "Mrs." Thornton followed along, nodding slowly, her expression growing more impressed. "Well," she said when Sarah finished, "Wesley didn't oversell you. You've got a head for numbers." "Does that mean I have the job?" Sarah asked hopefully. "Room and board plus $20 a month to start. You'll handle the accounts, help with cooking and housekeeping, and anything else that needs doing. Sundays are your own, and I expect honesty and hard work. We have an understanding." "Yes, madam," Sarah said, relief flooding through her. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've survived your first winter here." Mrs. Thornton stood and extended her hand. Sarah shook it, noting the firm, calloused grip. "You can move in whenever you're ready. There's a room off the kitchen that's yours." Wesley was smiling when they left the house. "I told you she'd like you," he said. "I was terrified," Sarah admitted. "You didn't show it. That's what matters." He helped her mount Juniper. "When do you want to move out here?" "Tomorrow, if that's all right. I should spend one more night at the boarding house since you already paid for it." "Sounds good. I'll come by in the morning to help you bring your things." They rode back toward Sioux Falls, the afternoon sun slanting golden across the prairie. Sarah felt something she had not felt in weeks: hope. Real, tangible hope that she might actually build a life here, far from Marcus Crandall and everything she had fled. "Wesley," she said as they neared town, "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. You've given me a chance when I had nothing." He turned in his saddle to look at her, his honey-colored eyes warm. "You gave yourself that chance by being brave enough to run. I just helped you find a place to land. Still, I won't forget it." "Good," he said softly, "because I'm not planning on letting you forget me." There was something in his tone that made Sarah's heart skip, but before she could respond, they had reached the edge of town. Wesley escorted her back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Patterson was waiting on the porch. "How did it go?" she asked. "I got the job," Sarah said, dismounting. "I'm moving to the ranch tomorrow." "Well, that's wonderful news," Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Mrs. Thornton is a good woman. She'll treat you fairly." Wesley tipped his hat. "I'll be back tomorrow morning, Miss Lancaster, around 9. "That's perfect. Thank you again." She watched him ride away, and Mrs. Patterson chuckled beside her. "That Wesley Turner is a good man," she said. "One of the best. You could do a lot worse in these parts." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's just being kind." "MMHMM," Mrs. Patterson said, but she was smiling. "Come on inside. Let's get you some supper." That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been trapped in Kansas with no future but a forced marriage to a cruel man. Now she was in Dakota Territory with a job and the beginnings of a new life. And then there was Wesley, with his quiet kindness and steady presence. She was not naive enough to think all her troubles were behind her. Marcus Crandall might still find her. Winter in Dakota Territory would be harsh. She was alone in a strange place with no family and few friends. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Sarah packed her few belongings, the borrowed dress carefully folded and her own cleaned as best as Mrs. Patterson could manage. When Wesley arrived, he helped her tie her small bag to Juniper's saddle. "Traveling light," he observed. "I left in a hurry," Sarah said. "I didn't have time to pack much." "We'll fix that. Mrs. Thornton will advance you money if you need things, and the Hanson store has most everything." They rode out to the ranch together, and Sarah felt a strange sense of homecoming as the buildings came into view. Mrs. Thornton was waiting for her, and she showed Sarah to her room, a small but comfortable space with a window overlooking the horse pasture. "Get yourself settled, Mrs. Thornton said. "Then come find me and we'll go over the daily routine." The first few days were a blur of learning. Sarah woke before dawn to help start breakfast for the ranch hands. Wesley and his brother William usually showed up by 6, along with 2 seasonal workers named Pete and Sam. The men were respectful and friendly, thanking her for the food and keeping their manners in her presence. William Turner was younger than Wesley by 2 years, with the same sandy hair but a more reserved demeanor. He nodded politely to Sarah, but did not go out of his way to engage in conversation. Sarah got the sense that he was sizing her up, deciding whether she was trustworthy. After breakfast, Sarah would tackle the accounts while Mrs. Thornton went out to oversee the ranch work. Sarah discovered that the older woman was an excellent rancher, but had let the paperwork slide terribly. It took her nearly a week to get everything properly organized and up to date. "You've done more in a week than I managed in 6 months," Mrs. Thornton said, looking over the neat ledgers. "I knew I made the right choice hiring you." Sarah also took over most of the cooking and cleaning, though Mrs. Thornton insisted on helping with the heavier work. "I'm not an invalid," she said gruffly. "I can still pull my weight." In the evenings, after supper was cleared and the dishes washed, Sarah would sometimes sit on the porch with Mrs. Thornton and watch the sun set over the prairie. It was during these quiet moments that she learned more about the older woman. Mrs. Thornton had come west from Pennsylvania 30 years ago with her husband, fleeing her own forced marriage to a man her father had chosen. "My Robert, he was a ranch hand on my father's property," she said. "We fell in love, but my father had bigger plans for me. So we ran off together, came out here and built this place from nothing. You must miss him," Sarah said softly, "every day, but I've got this ranch and that's his legacy. I'll keep it running as long as I have breath." She glanced at Sarah. "What about you? You got anyone you left behind that you cared for?" "My mother and sisters. I miss them terribly." Sarah's voice caught. "I wish I knew they were all right. You could write to them, careful like so it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Sarah had thought of that but dismissed it as too dangerous. What if Marcus intercepts the letter, send it to someone else? A friend, maybe, or a neighbor you trust. Have them pass along news. It was a good idea, and Sarah resolved to do it. She spent the next evening carefully composing a letter to Mrs. Brennan, an elderly neighbor who had always been kind to her family. She kept it vague, saying only that she was safe and working as a housekeeper, but asking for news of her mother and sisters. She posted it the next time she went to town with Wesley to pick up supplies. As the weeks passed, Sarah fell into the rhythm of ranch life. She grew to love the wide open spaces, the smell of grass and horses, the endless sky. She also grew more comfortable with the people around her. William eventually warmed to her, especially after she successfully treated a cut on his arm that had been getting infected. She had a steady hand and a gentle touch, and he thanked her gruffly. But it was Wesley whose company she sought out most. He often found reasons to be near the house, offering to help with chores or sitting on the porch in the evening to talk. Their conversations ranged from the mundane to the meaningful. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about learning to ride and rope from his father. She told him about Kansas, about the farm and her sisters and the books she loved to read. "I wanted to be a teacher once," she confessed one evening, "before my father's debts made that impossible." "You still could," Wesley said. "The school in town is always looking for help. Maybe someday." "For now, I'm happy here. Are you?" Wesley asked, his eyes searching hers. "Really happy?" Sarah considered the question. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time. I feel safe here, valued. That's not nothing." "No," Wesley agreed. "That's not nothing." He was sitting close to her on the porch steps, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. When he reached out and took her hand, she did not pull away. His palm was rough against hers, his fingers strong and gentle. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I want you to know that I care for you, more than I probably should given the circumstances." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Wesley, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not expecting anything from you. I just want you to be happy, whatever that means. Sarah looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the fading light, his features were soft with affection, and she felt something shift in her chest. She had been so focused on survival, on escaping Marcus and building a new life, that she had not let herself think about what she might actually want for herself. I care for you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been so kind to me, so patient. I just don't know if I'm ready for more than that. I understand, and I'm willing to wait. Wesley smiled. I'm a patient man, Sarah Lancaster. I can wait as long as you need. Summer deepened into late July and August. Sarah's letter to Mrs. Brennan came back with a reply tucked inside a larger envelope. Her mother and sisters were all right, though they had been forced to move into the town of Oberlin to work. Marcus Crandall had indeed thrown them off the farm when Sarah disappeared, but they were managing. Her mother sent her love and begged Sarah to stay safe and not come back. Sarah cried when she read the letter, relief and guilt warring in her chest. She wished she could do more for them, send them money or bring them to Dakota Territory. But she was barely established herself, and she knew that any contact might lead Marcus straight to her. Wesley found her on the porch with the letter in her hand, tears streaming down her face. He sat beside her without a word and pulled her into his arms. Sarah let herself lean against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They're all right, she said when she could speak. My family, they're all right. That's good news, Wesley said, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. But they had to leave the farm. They're working in town now because of me. Not because of you. Because of your father's debts and Marcus Crandall's cruelty. You're not responsible for that. Sarah knew he was right intellectually, but the guilt still gnawed at her. Wesley held her until the tears subsided, and when she pulled back, he wiped her cheeks gently with his thumbs. You're stronger than you know, he said. And you're not alone. In September, the weather began to turn. The days were still warm, but the nights grew cooler, and Mrs. Thornton began preparing for winter in earnest. They harvested the kitchen garden, putting up vegetables in the root cellar. The ranch hands worked to stockpile hay and repair any damage to the buildings before the first snow. Sarah had been at the ranch for 3 months, and she felt firmly established in her role. Mrs. Thornton relied on her completely for the accounts and most of the housekeeping, and Sarah took pride in keeping everything running smoothly. She had also saved most of her wages, hoping eventually to send money to her mother. One evening in late September, Wesley asked if he could take her into town the following Saturday. There's a dance at the church, he said. Nothing fancy, but it's a good time. I thought you might like to go. Sarah hesitated. She had not been to any social events since arriving in Sioux Falls, afraid of drawing attention to herself. But it had been months with no sign of Marcus, and she was starting to believe she might truly be safe. I'd like that, she said. But I don't have anything appropriate to wear. I saw you talking to Charlotte Hanson the other day. Maybe she could help with that? Sarah had indeed become friends with Charlotte, visiting her whenever she came to town for supplies. The next time she saw her, she mentioned the dance. Oh, you have to come, Charlotte exclaimed. It's one of the few fun things we do around here, and I have a dress that would be perfect for you. My cousin sent it from St. Louis, but it's too long for me and just about your height. The dress was a soft gray-blue cotton with a modest neckline and fitted waist. When Sarah tried it on in the back room of the store, Charlotte clapped her hands in delight. You look beautiful. Wesley won't be able to take his eyes off you. Sarah blushed. We're just friends. Sure you are, Charlotte said with a knowing smile. That's why he looks at you like you hung the moon. On Saturday evening, Wesley arrived at the ranch in a wagon, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his best clothes. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved. Sarah came out wearing the borrowed dress with her hair pinned up, and the look on Wesley's face made her heart flutter. "You look lovely," he said, helping her into the wagon. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." The church was lit up when they arrived, music spilling out into the night. Inside, the pews had been pushed back to create a dance floor, and what seemed like half the town had turned out. Charlotte waved at them from across the room, standing with a young man Sarah recognized as one of the ranch hands from a neighboring spread. Wesley introduced Sarah to people she had not yet met, the Reverend Matthews and his wife, the doctor, the sheriff. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and Sarah began to relax. When the music started, Wesley held out his hand. "May I have this dance?" Sarah had not danced in years, but the steps came back to her. Wesley was a good dancer, leading her confidently through the simple patterns. Being held in his arms, moving to the music with the warmth of other people around them, Sarah felt truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. They danced several dances, then took a break to get some punch. Charlotte appeared at Sarah's elbow, fanning herself. "Isn't this wonderful?" she said. "I love these dances. Makes me forget we live in the middle of nowhere." "It's lovely," Sarah agreed. A young man asked Charlotte to dance, and she went off happily. Wesley and Sarah found a quiet spot near the door where they could catch the cool evening breeze. "Are you having a good time?" Wesley asked. "I am. Thank you for bringing me. Thank you for coming." He paused, then said, "Sarah, there's something I want to talk to you about." Her stomach fluttered nervously. "What is it?" Before he could answer, there was a commotion near the entrance. Sarah turned to see a man pushing through the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and a cruel mouth. Her blood ran cold. Marcus Crandall, he was here. He had found her. Sarah grabbed Wesley's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "That's him," she whispered urgently. "That's Marcus." Wesley's expression hardened. He stepped in front of Sarah, shielding her from view. But it was too late. Marcus had spotted her. "Sarah," he bellowed, his voice carrying over the music. The dance stopped, everyone turning to stare. "Sarah Lancaster, you get over here right now." "You need to leave," Wesley said, his voice calm but firm. "This is a private event." Marcus ignored him, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "I've been looking for you for months, you ungrateful little witch. Your father owes me, and you're going to make good on that debt." The sheriff, a grizzled man named Tom Holloway, pushed through the crowd. "What's going on here?" "This woman is my fiancée," Marcus said. "She ran out on our engagement. I'm here to take her back to Kansas where she belongs." "I am not your fiancée," Sarah said, finding her voice. She stepped out from behind Wesley, her chin raised. "I never agreed to marry you. You tried to force me into it. Your father gave his word." "My father doesn't own me. No one does." Marcus's face darkened with rage. He took a step toward Sarah, but Wesley moved to block him. "That's far enough," Wesley said. "Get out of my way, cowboy. This is none of your business." "She's made it my business." Wesley's hand hovered near his hip, and Sarah realized with a shock that he was wearing a gun. She had never seen him armed before. The sheriff stepped between them. "Nobody's doing anything hasty," he said firmly. "Mr. Crandall, is it? You got any legal claim to this young lady? Her father owes me money. We had an arrangement." "An arrangement between you and her father doesn't give you any rights over her," Sheriff Holloway said. "Unless you've got a marriage license or a court order, you've got no legal standing here." "This is ridiculous," Marcus snarled. "Sarah, stop this nonsense and come with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Sarah said. "I have a job here, a home. I'm staying." Marcus lunged toward her, and several things happened at once. Wesley grabbed Marcus's arm and twisted it behind his back. William Turner appeared from the crowd and seized Marcus's other arm. The sheriff barked orders, and 2 other men came forward to help restrain Marcus. "You're making a big mistake," Marcus hissed at Sarah. "You think you can just run away from your responsibilities? I'll make sure your family pays for this." "My family has nothing to do with this," Sarah said, though fear clenched her stomach. "Leave them alone." "Sheriff, I want this man out of town," Wesley said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Tonight." "I'm inclined to agree," Sheriff Holloway said. "Mr. Crandall, you've disrupted a church event and attempted to assault a woman. I'm going to escort you to the edge of town and suggest you don't come back." "You can't do that." "I just did. Boys, let's go." They hauled Marcus out of the church, still protesting. Sarah was shaking, and Wesley put his arm around her shoulders. "It's all right," he said quietly. "He's gone." But Sarah knew it was not that simple. Marcus was vindictive and stubborn. He would not give up this easily. The evening was ruined, the dance breaking up as people talked in hushed, excited whispers. Charlotte came over and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. Wesley drove her back to the ranch in tense silence. When they arrived, Mrs. Thornton was waiting on the porch, clearly having heard the news somehow. Small towns had a way of spreading information fast. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you. In the kitchen, Mrs." Thornton made coffee while Sarah told her the whole story. When she finished, the older woman nodded grimly. "Men like that don't give up easy," she said. "But you're not alone, Sarah. We'll figure this out." "I should leave," Sarah said. "If I go, Marcus will follow me and leave everyone here alone." "You'll do no such thing," Mrs. Thornton said sharply. "Running didn't solve the problem before, and it won't now. You've got friends here, and we protect our own." Wesley reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "She's right. You're not running anymore. We'll face this together." Sarah wanted to believe them, but fear was a cold weight in her chest. What if Marcus hurt someone because of her? What if he went after her family in Kansas? The possibilities spun through her mind, each worse than the last. "I need some air," she said, standing abruptly. She walked out into the cool night, wrapping her arms around herself. The stars were brilliant overhead, the prairie stretching dark and endless in all directions. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Wesley. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've brought trouble to you and Mrs. Thornton. You haven't brought anything except yourself, and that's been nothing but a blessing." Wesley came to stand beside her. "Sarah, I meant what I said. We're going to handle this together." "How?" "Marcus won't just give up and go away." "Maybe not. But the sheriff made it clear he's not welcome here. And if he tries anything, he'll have to deal with me and every other man on this ranch." Sarah turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his face was serious and determined. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much?" "Because I love you," Wesley said simply. "I've loved you since the day I found you crying at that well, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." Sarah's breath caught. "Wesley, I know it's soon. I know you might not feel the same way. But I needed you to know." He cupped her face gently in his hands. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief and something deeper, something that had been growing in her heart for months. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." Wesley pulled her into his arms and kissed her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as Sarah melted against him. It was nothing like Marcus's brutal attempt to force himself on her. This was tender and sweet, full of promise and care. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "We'll get through this," Wesley said. "I promise you." Sarah wanted to believe him. She let him hold her under the stars, drawing strength from his presence. Whatever happened next, at least she was not facing it alone. The next few days were tense. Sheriff Holloway confirmed that Marcus had left town, but no one knew if he had actually returned to Kansas or was simply waiting nearby. Mrs. Thornton hired an extra hand to keep watch at night, and Wesley made sure Sarah was never alone when she left the ranch. Sarah tried to continue with her normal routine, but fear dogged her steps. She kept expecting to see Marcus appear, to hear his voice demanding she return with him. She wrote another letter to Mrs. Brennan, warning her mother to be careful and to let her know if Marcus showed up making threats. A week after the dance, Wesley came to find Sarah in the kitchen where she was kneading bread dough. "Can you take a break?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you." Sarah wiped her hands and followed him outside. He led her to the barn and into an empty stall that had been converted into a small workshop. On a workbench sat a wooden box, beautifully made with dovetail joints and a fitted lid. "I made this for you," Wesley said, "for keeping letters and important papers. I know you've been worried about your family's letters falling into the wrong hands." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth wood, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, thank you." "There's a false bottom," Wesley said, showing her how to trigger the hidden compartment. "For things you really need to keep safe." Sarah threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "You're too good to me." "Impossible," Wesley said, holding her close. "I could never be too good to you." They stood like that for a long moment, and Sarah felt some of the tension drain from her body. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she had this good man who loved her. That had to count for something. As September turned to October, the first frost came, painting the prairie grass silver in the mornings. There was still no sign of Marcus, and Sarah began to hope that perhaps the sheriff's warning had been enough to send him back to Kansas for good. Then, one morning in mid-October, Sarah found a note tacked to the door of the ranch house. It was in Marcus's handwriting, just 2 lines. "You can't hide forever. I always collect what's owed to me." Sarah brought the note to Mrs. Thornton and Wesley with shaking hands. Wesley's jaw clenched as he read it. "He's still here," Sarah said, "somewhere nearby watching." "Then we need to end this," Wesley said. "I'm going to talk to the sheriff." "Wait," Mrs. Thornton said. "Maybe there's another way. Sarah, what if we could pay off your father's debt? Remove Marcus's claim entirely." "It was $500, Sarah said. "I don't have that kind of money." "But I do," Mrs. Thornton said. "I could lend it to you. You could pay me back over time." Sarah was shaking her head before Mrs. Thornton finished. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not a gift, it's a loan, and it's worth it to get that vulture off our backs." Mrs. Thornton's expression was firm. "I won't have him terrorizing you or anyone else on my property." Wesley was nodding. "It's a good solution. We send the money to your father, he pays off Crandall, and there's no more debt. No more supposed claim on you." Sarah wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. If there was no debt, Marcus had no leverage, no justification for his pursuit of her. "My father might not accept it," she said. "He's proud." "Then we'll send it with a letter explaining that it's from you, that you've been saving your wages," Wesley said. "He doesn't need to know the full truth. It took another week to arrange everything." Mrs. Thornton withdrew the money from the bank in Sioux Falls, and Sarah wrote a carefully worded letter to her father explaining that she had been working and saving, and this was to clear his debt. She sent it with the money via registered mail, hoping it would reach him safely. While they waited for confirmation that the payment had been received, Sarah continued to feel Marcus's presence like a shadow. She saw him once, watching from a distance when she went into town with Wesley. The sheriff ran him off, but it was clear he was not going to leave quietly. Finally, in early November, a letter arrived from Sarah's mother. Her father had received the money and paid off Marcus Crandall in full. Marcus had been furious but had no legal recourse. The debt was settled. Sarah cried with relief when she read the letter. Wesley held her and she could feel his own tension easing. "It's over," she said. "It's really over." "Not quite," Wesley said. "Marcus is still here. We need to make sure he understands that he has no more claim and no more business with you." The confrontation came 2 days later. Marcus appeared at the ranch in broad daylight, riding up to the house as if he owned it. Mrs. Thornton, Wesley, William, and the other ranch hands were all present, a united front. "Sarah," Marcus called, "I know you're in there. Come out and talk to me like a civilized person." Sarah stepped onto the porch, Wesley at her side. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want what's owed to me. You think sending money settles this? That was your father's debt, not mine. You still owe me for all the trouble you've caused." "I don't owe you anything," Sarah said firmly. "The debt is paid. You have no claim on me or my family." "You humiliated me," Marcus snarled, "running off like a thief in the night, making me chase you across 2 territories. You're going to pay for that." "The only one who's going to pay is you if you don't leave my property right now, Mrs. Thornton said. She was holding a rifle, not pointing it at Marcus but making it clear she could. "You've got no business here. This is between me and Sarah." "No," Wesley said, stepping forward. "It's between you and all of us. Sarah is under our protection. If you threaten her, you threaten all of us, and we don't take kindly to threats." The other ranch hands had moved to flank Marcus, creating a semicircle of armed, determined men. Marcus looked around, seeming to realize for the first time that he was badly outnumbered. "This isn't over," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Yes, it is," Sarah said. "You need to accept that and move on with your life. I have." Marcus's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, Sheriff Holloway rode up with 2 deputies. "Marcus Crandall," he called. "I'm placing you under arrest for harassment and trespassing." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you've been warned multiple times to stay away from Miss Lancaster and this property, and you've refused to comply. You're coming with me." Marcus tried to argue, but the deputies dismounted and took him into custody. As they led him away, he shot one last venomous look at Sarah. "I'll be back," he said. "No, you won't," Sheriff Holloway said. "Because if you set foot in this territory again, you're going to jail for a good long while. We're done being patient with you." They took Marcus away, and Sarah felt as if a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Wesley pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his chest. "It's really over now," he said. "He's gone. What if he comes back? Then we'll deal with it. But I don't think he will. Men like that are bullies. Once someone stands up to them properly, they move on to easier targets." Mrs. Thornton came over and patted Sarah's shoulder. "You did good, standing up to him like that. I'm proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Sarah said. "That's what family does," Mrs. Thornton said. "We stand together." The word family resonated in Sarah's heart. These people, this place, had become her family in a way she had never expected. She had come to Dakota Territory running from one life, and she had found another, better one. As November deepened and the first snows began to fall, Sarah settled into a peaceful routine. There was no more looking over her shoulder, no more fear of Marcus appearing. Word came through the sheriff that Marcus had indeed left the territory, heading south toward Texas. Sarah allowed herself to believe she was truly free. Wesley courted her properly now with Mrs. Thornton's full approval. He took her on buggy rides when the weather permitted, brought her wildflowers he found on the prairie, and sat with her in the evenings reading aloud from books they borrowed from the Reverend's small library. Their relationship deepened, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. On Christmas Eve, Wesley asked Sarah to take a walk with him despite the cold. They bundled up in coats and scarves and walked out to a small rise overlooking the ranch. The snow was pristine white under the moonlight, the sky clear and full of stars. "Sarah," Wesley said, taking her hands in his, "I know we haven't known each other a full year yet, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you here on this land, raising horses and cattle and maybe children someday. Will you marry me?" Sarah's heart swelled with joy. "Yes," she said, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Wesley pulled her into a kiss that warmed her despite the cold. When they returned to the ranch house, Mrs. Thornton took one look at their faces and smiled. "About time," she said. "I was wondering when you'd get around to asking her." They were married in February of 1879, in the small church in Sioux Falls, with Charlotte as Sarah's maid of honor and William as Wesley's best man. The whole town turned out for the celebration, and Sarah felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance of the community. Mrs. Thornton gave them the foreman's cabin as a wedding present, a small but sturdy building that had been empty since her husband died. Sarah and Wesley spent their first weeks of marriage fixing it up, making it truly their own. Wesley built furniture while Sarah sewed curtains and arranged their few possessions. Spring came early that year, and with it, new beginnings. Sarah discovered she was pregnant in April, and Wesley was overjoyed. They told Mrs. Thornton, who immediately began planning for the baby's arrival. "I'm going to be a grandmother," she said with satisfaction. About time this ranch had children on it again. Sarah wrote to her mother with the news and received a letter back full of love and congratulations. Her mother wrote that they were doing well, that Sarah's sisters sent their love, and that they hoped to visit someday when they had saved enough money for the journey. The baby, a boy, was born in December of 1879. They named him Robert after Mrs. Thornton's late husband, which moved the older woman to tears. Robert was healthy and strong, with his father's honey-colored eyes and a powerful set of lungs. Wesley was a devoted father from the start, taking to the role as naturally as he did everything else. Sarah would often find him sitting by the cradle, talking softly to Robert about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when the boy was older. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Sarah managed the household and the accounts while caring for Robert. Wesley worked the ranch alongside William and Mrs. Thornton, and together they began to expand the operation. The Double T prospered, gaining a reputation for quality horses. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Sarah's dark hair and a sweet disposition. Robert, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping with everything. Mrs. Thornton's health began to decline when Sarah was pregnant with their third child. The older woman had never fully recovered from a bout of pneumonia the previous winter, and she tired easily. But she refused to slow down, insisting on still overseeing the ranch work. "I'll rest when I'm dead," she said with characteristic bluntness. The third baby, another boy they named James, was born in the spring of 1883. Mrs. Thornton rallied enough to hold him, smiling down at the infant with tenderness. "You've got a good family here, Sarah," she said. "Take care of them, and take care of this ranch. It's yours now, you know. I'm leaving it to you and Wesley." "Don't talk like that," Sarah protested. "You're going to be fine." But Mrs. Thornton passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later. The whole territory mourned her. She had been a pioneer, a strong woman who had carved out a place for herself in a harsh land, and her legacy lived on in the ranch she had built. Sarah and Wesley officially took over the Double T, with William as a full partner. They continued to grow the operation, hiring more hands and expanding their herds. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Sarah's mother and sisters finally made the journey to Dakota Territory in 1885. It was an emotional reunion, with many tears and embraces. Sarah's mother met her grandchildren for the first time and marveled at how much Sarah's life had changed. "I'm so proud of you," her mother said. "You were so brave, leaving like you did, and look what you've built." "I was terrified," Sarah admitted, "but I knew I couldn't marry Marcus. I'd rather have died." "Well, you didn't die. You thrived, and you found love with a good man." Sarah's sisters, now young women themselves, fell in love with the ranch and the wide open spaces. The younger one, Emma, ended up marrying one of the ranch hands 2 years later and settling nearby. It was a joy for Sarah to have family close again. The years passed in a blur of work and love and children. Sarah and Wesley had 5 children in total: Robert, Rose, James, and twins named Samuel and Grace, born in 1887. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Wesley and William adding rooms as needed. Sarah never forgot those first days in Sioux Falls, crying at the well with no hope and no future. She thought of it often, marveling at how much had changed. The scared young woman who had fled Kansas was gone, replaced by someone stronger and happier than she had ever imagined she could be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wesley took Sarah back to that well at the edge of town. It was still there, though the town had grown up around it. They stood hand in hand, looking at the spot where their story had begun. "You remember what I said to you?" Wesley asked. "Let me quench your thirst for happiness," Sarah quoted. "I thought you were crazy offering water to someone drowning in despair. But you took it anyway. Best decision I ever made." Sarah leaned against him. "You did quench that thirst, you know. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted." "You gave it to yourself," Wesley said. "I just helped you find it." They kissed there by the well, and Sarah felt the circle complete. She had come to this place broken and afraid, and she had been remade into someone whole. The journey had been hard, but worth every step. As they rode back to the ranch together, Sarah looked out over the land that had become her home. The prairie grass waved in the wind, the sky stretched endless and blue, and somewhere ahead, their children were waiting. She had found her happiness, built it with her own hands and the help of a good man who had seen her pain and offered kindness. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Robert grew into a serious young man who loved working with the horses as much as his father did. At 18, he was already talking about expanding into horse breeding, specializing in sturdy working animals that could handle the harsh Dakota winters. Rose, at 16, had her mother's head for numbers and her grandmother's no-nonsense attitude. She took over much of the bookkeeping, freeing Sarah to focus on managing the household and helping with the younger children. James, the quietest of the bunch, preferred books to horses. He talked about becoming a lawyer someday, which both Sarah and Wesley encouraged. The twins, Samuel and Grace, were 10 years old and inseparable, always getting into some kind of mischief together. William had married a schoolteacher named Margaret, and they had 3 children of their own. The 2 families shared Sunday dinners, and the cousins grew up as close as siblings. The ranch employed 15 hands now, and the Double T brand was known throughout the territory for quality livestock and fair dealing. Dakota Territory had changed too. Talk of statehood was constant, and new settlers arrived every year. Sioux Falls had grown from a small frontier town into a proper city with paved streets, multiple churches, and even a small opera house. Sarah sometimes missed the simple early days, but she appreciated the progress and the opportunities it brought for her children. She received regular letters from her mother, who had remained in Kansas with Sarah's father. The old man had finally given up gambling and found steady work. He had written to Sarah once, a brief letter apologizing for his failures and thanking her for saving the family from his debts. Sarah had forgiven him, though the wound had taken years to fully heal. Marcus Crandall was a distant memory now, a nightmare from another life. Sarah had heard through various channels that he had moved to Texas, married and settled down. She hoped he had changed, become a better man, though she did not particularly care either way. He was no longer her concern. On a crisp autumn day in 1892, Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house watching Wesley teach Samuel how to rope a fence post. Grace sat beside her, reading aloud from a book. The other children were scattered around doing various chores, and the smell of apple pie drifted from the kitchen where Rose was baking. "Mama," Grace said, looking up from her book, "were you always happy here?" Sarah considered the question. "Not always," she said honestly. "When I first came here, I was scared and sad. I had left everything I knew behind, but I found happiness here with your father and all of you. Sometimes happiness is something you have to build, piece by piece." "How did you build it?" "By choosing to be brave. By accepting help when it was offered. By working hard and loving the people around me." Sarah pulled Grace close. "And by remembering that even in the darkest moments, there's always hope for something better." Wesley looked up from his lesson and caught Sarah's eye. He smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her believe she might find happiness in this strange new place. After 14 years of marriage, that smile still made her heart flutter. That evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Wesley sat on the porch as they often did. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a cool breeze carried the scent of prairie grass. "You ever think about that day at the well?" Wesley asked. "Often," Sarah admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once. I knew the moment I saw you that you were special. I just had to convince you to stay long enough to see it too," Sarah laughed. "You did more than convince me. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to hope." "We built this together," Wesley said, gesturing to the ranch spread out before them. "Every fence post, every building, every child. This is our legacy." "What do you think the children will do with it?" Sarah asked. "Robert wants to take over the ranch, but the others have different dreams." "Then we'll support those dreams," Wesley said, "just like we've always done. The ranch will be here for whoever wants it, but I won't force any of them into a life they don't choose. Not like what almost happened to you." It was a promise they had made to each other years ago, that their children would have choices, would be free to pursue their own happiness. Sarah was determined that none of them would ever feel trapped the way she once had. The following spring, Robert announced his engagement to Charlotte Hanson's younger sister, Emily. It was a joyful occasion, and the wedding was planned for June. Sarah threw herself into the preparations, thrilled that her eldest was settling down with a woman from a good family. The wedding was beautiful, held in the same church where Sarah and Wesley had married 14 years earlier. Emily was a lovely bride, and Robert could not stop smiling. As Sarah watched them exchange vows, she felt the passage of time acutely. Her baby boy was a man now, starting his own family. At the reception, Wesley pulled Sarah onto the dance floor. They moved together with the ease of long practice, comfortable and familiar. "Our son is married," Wesley said. "I feel old." "You're not old, you're distinguished," Sarah smiled up at him. "And still the handsomest man in the territory." Flatterer, truth teller, they danced until the music stopped, and then they danced some more. Later, Sarah stood with Rose and watched Robert and Emily cut their wedding cake. "You think they'll be as happy as you and Papa?" Rose asked. "I hope so," Sarah said. "They have a good foundation. Love, respect, shared dreams, that's what matters." Is that what you and Papa have? Yes. And commitment. We've had hard times too, Rose. Years when the weather was bad and we lost cattle. Times when money was tight and we weren't sure we'd make it through. But we faced those challenges together and that made us stronger. Rose nodded thoughtfully. At 16, she was at an age where she was starting to think about her own future. Sarah hoped she would find the same kind of love and partnership that she had found with Wesley. The years rolled on. Robert and Emily had their first child, a daughter, making Sarah and Wesley grandparents. James left for university in the fall of 1895, pursuing his dream of becoming a lawyer. The twins started talking about different paths too. Samuel wanted to join the cavalry, while Grace was interested in medicine. Dakota Territory finally achieved statehood in 1889, splitting into North and South Dakota. The ranch was in South Dakota now, and there was a new sense of permanence and legitimacy to their community. Laws were more established, and the wild frontier days were fading into memory. Sarah was 42 years old in 1896, 18 years after she had first arrived in Sioux Falls. She stood at the well one morning, drawing water as she had countless times before. The town had grown up around it, but the well remained, a constant marker of where her new life had begun. A young woman approached, looking dusty and tired. She was crying, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Sarah recognized that despair, knew it intimately. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked gently. The young woman looked up, startled. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You're not disturbing me." Sarah drew the bucket up and poured water into a cup. "Here, you look like you could use this." The young woman drank gratefully, then wiped her eyes. "Thank you. I've been traveling for days. I don't know where to go or what to do." "What's your name?" "Elizabeth." "Elizabeth Morrison." "I'm Sarah Turner, and I know exactly how you feel." Sarah sat down on the edge of the well platform. "I was sitting right here, crying just like you are, 18 years ago. A kind man offered me water and help, and it changed my life." Elizabeth looked at her with hope dawning in her eyes. "Really, really. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you the same way I was helped." They talked for an hour, Elizabeth pouring out her story. She was running from a bad situation in Nebraska, fleeing a violent father and searching for a fresh start. Sarah listened with compassion, remembering her own fear and desperation. "Come home with me," Sarah said finally. "We have room at the ranch and we could use help. You'll have work, a safe place to stay, and time to figure out your next steps." "I don't know how to thank you," Elizabeth said, tears starting again. "You don't need to thank me. Just pass it on someday when you find someone else who needs help." Sarah brought Elizabeth back to the ranch, where Wesley welcomed her without question. They gave her the same room Sarah had once occupied at Mrs. Thornton's boarding house, which they now used for guests and temporary workers. Over supper that night, Wesley caught Sarah's eye and smiled. She knew he was thinking the same thing she was. The circle continues. They had been helped in their time of need, and now they could offer that same help to someone else. Elizabeth settled into ranch life much as Sarah had. She was smart and capable, and she took to the work eagerly. Over the following months, Sarah watched her transform from a frightened young woman into someone confident and capable. William's eldest son, Thomas, was immediately smitten with Elizabeth. At 21, he was a serious young man who had inherited his father's steady nature. Sarah watched their courtship develop with satisfaction, remembering her own romance with Wesley. By the time 1897 rolled around, Elizabeth and Thomas were engaged. Another wedding at the church in Sioux Falls, another celebration of new beginnings. Sarah stood with Wesley and felt the rightness of it all. This was what community meant, helping each other, building lives together, creating something that lasted. "We've had a good life, haven't we?" Wesley said that night as they prepared for bed. "The best," Sarah agreed. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, seeing the gray in her hair and the lines on her face. "I look at myself sometimes and barely recognize the girl who fled Kansas all those years ago." "You're still beautiful," Wesley said, coming to stand behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist. "More beautiful now than ever, because I can see all the strength and love that went into building the life we have." Sarah leaned back against him. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for that day at the well, for seeing past the tears and the fear to the person I could become." "You always were that person. I just offered you a cup of water and a chance." "Let me quench your thirst for happiness," Sarah quoted. "You did more than that. You gave me a whole life I never dreamed I could have." Wesley turned her in his arms and kissed her, slow and sweet. After nearly 20 years of marriage, the passion between them had evolved into something deeper and more sustaining. It was the kind of love that weathered storms and celebrated sunshine, that grew stronger with each passing year. The turn of the century found the Turner family well established and prosperous. Robert and Emily had 3 children now and were successfully running the horse breeding operation. James had graduated from law school and opened a practice in Sioux Falls, handling land disputes and contracts for ranchers throughout the region. Samuel had indeed joined the cavalry and was stationed at Fort Meade, visiting when he could. Grace was attending medical school in Chicago, one of the few women in her class, determined to become a doctor. Sarah and Wesley had slowed down a bit, letting the younger generation take on more of the heavy work. But they were still vital and active, still partners in every sense. They spent their evenings on the porch, watching their grandchildren play and reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Wesley took Sarah's hand. "If you could go back," he said. "Back to that day at the well." "Would you change anything?" Sarah thought about it. The fear, the uncertainty, the risk of leaving everything familiar. The hard early days, the confrontation with Marcus, the struggles to build a new life. And then the love, the children, the success, the community they had created. "Not a single thing," she said firmly. "Every hardship led us here. Every challenge made us stronger. I wouldn't trade this life for anything." "Neither would I," Wesley said. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Sarah Lancaster Turner. And you were my salvation, Wesley Turner. My knight in dusty chaps and a worn hat." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the prairie. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied. The ranch was alive with activity even as dusk settled. This was their legacy. The land they had worked, the family they had raised, the love they had nurtured. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah reflected on the words Wesley had spoken so long ago. "Let me quench your thirst for happiness." He had done exactly that, offering not just water from a well but hope, love, and partnership. Together they had built something lasting and true, and she had done the same for him, though she had not realized it at the time. She had given him someone to protect and care for, a family to build, a purpose beyond the daily grind of ranch work. They had saved each other, really, meeting at exactly the right moment when both needed what the other could offer. The children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner as they always did. The table was loud with conversation and laughter, multiple generations sharing food and stories. Sarah looked around at all the faces, each one beloved, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was happiness. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love and purpose and connection. It was in the small moments. Wesley's hand finding hers under the table, Robert's pride as he talked about a new foal, Rose's careful explanation of the ranch's finances, the grandchildren's giggles as they played. After dinner, young Margaret, Robert's eldest daughter, who was now 8 years old, climbed into Sarah's lap. "Grandma," she said, "tell me the story about when you first came here." It was a story Sarah had told many times, but she never tired of it. She pulled Margaret close and began. "It was June of 1878, and I was very scared and very sad. I had traveled for days, and I thought I had no place left to go. I stopped at a well to rest, and I started to cry. And then your grandfather appeared on his horse, and he offered me water and kindness when I needed it most." "And then you fell in love?" Margaret asked, her eyes shining. "Not right away," Sarah said with a smile. "First I had to find my courage again. Your grandfather helped me do that. He showed me that I could build a new life, that I deserved happiness and safety. And somewhere along the way I realized that I loved him very much." "And they lived happily ever after," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Yes," Sarah agreed, catching Wesley's eye across the room. "We did." As the evening wound down and families headed home, Sarah and Wesley stood on the porch one last time. The prairie stretched out before them, silver in the moonlight. "No regrets?" Wesley asked. "None," Sarah said. "Only gratitude." She thought about all the paths not taken, all the different ways her life could have unfolded. She could have married Marcus, lived a life of quiet desperation. She could have stayed in Kansas, never finding the courage to run. She could have stopped anywhere on her journey east, settled in some other town with some other life. But she had ended up here in Sioux Falls at that well, on that June day in 1878. And Wesley had been there waiting, though neither of them had known it. Fate, providence, luck, whatever you wanted to call it, it had brought them together at exactly the right moment. "Come to bed," Wesley said softly. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Sarah let him lead her inside to the bedroom they had shared for more than 20 years. As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, she felt complete peace. The scared young woman who had cried at the well was gone, replaced by someone who had found not just survival but joy. The years had been kind to them, full of hard work and honest love. They had built something real and lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on the legacy of the Double T Ranch, would remember the stories of how it all began. And perhaps someday, another person fleeing fear and pain would find their way to Sioux Falls. Maybe they would stop at that old well, exhausted and despairing. And maybe someone would offer them water and hope, continuing the chain of kindness that had started so long ago. Sarah smiled in the darkness, holding tight to the man who had saved her and whom she had saved in return. They had quenched each other's thirst for happiness and found something even better. A love that sustained them through every season, every challenge, every year. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end.